Okay, thanks everybody for joining us on the final day, final lecture for COM350. I've appreciated all of your attention, and this next week is your guys' finals week. I mentioned earlier that the grade for the class is going to be based on the weekly assignments. And so just to recap, we've had lectures on each chapter, and there were quizzes associated for each of those chapters. And if you for whatever reason did not complete that particular quiz for the chapter on Cognella, you can still access it. But that access will end, basically next week. So that's your assignment for finals week, is get that done, clear that up, and then if you have any residual speaker surveys or guest speaker surveys that you haven't sent to me, then you need to send those to me, because you can do it on Laulima, but Laulima will stop working after the closing date for that particular speaker survey. So I know some have missed the date, and I told them just email it to me, and then I'll grade it and then put it onto the grade. And then and so today's guest lecture is I'll do a quick intro. It is going to be due on what is today? Today is the 12th, so it'll be due on the 19th. So, and if you got finals coming up, I would suggest you do it quickly so that you don't have to worry about it during finals week. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretty much, do all the grading, sum all the points, and that will, for the most part, result in the grade for the class. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do the math, there's 140 points for the quizzes. There's another 140 points for the guest lecture surveys, and a total amount of points is 280. So that's what I'm going to be grading against. So that's what you have to do between now and next week. But with that, I will do a quick intro for Chuck Freedman. He's a longtime journalist and political strategist, and worked on a bunch of political campaigns, and he probably has a wealth of stories he can tell. I invited Chuck to do a lecture to our COM class here, because we've covered the broad topic of electronic media, things like email and text and social media, and things like Zoom, and all, even using the phone, Chuck, that's still electronic. So all of those are elements of the platforms upon which all the students are pretty familiar with, and for the most part, the course was about how do you best use these tools, and how do you choose to convey yourself in these varied environments, and what happens when you start to have the freedom to perhaps change some of your personification, and how do you really manage who you are, and that can be challenging. And then as you start to seek out support in social networks, how do you leverage those? How do you become a member of those? How do you gain support from those, and how do you get influenced by them, you know? And I think to bring it back to why I think it's important to have Chuck kind of share his view of things is that he comes from the sort of like the news media standpoint. And Chuck, we've had a couple of news folks join us. We had somebody from Liberty from Hawaii Public Radio, and we had Melanie from Hawaii News Now. But they came on more from the use of these digital tools in terms of sharing some of the content, you know, that gets generated, which basically boils down to news. But what I think Chuck has a pretty firm view on is that, you know, these news sources are really changing. And from the time when there were some, you know, basically major news sources to now where there are fewer of those news sources, but much more of a proliferation of vehicles by which you can gain information, whether it's news or not. You know, it's each of the individuals in this class to determine, right? Because you could be on TikTok and you could hear a bunch of interesting videos. Some of them might be from trusted sources. Some of them might not be from trusted sources. Some of them might be compelling. Some of them might be convincing. And how do you discern whether it's, you know, valid from a news standpoint, and how do you then, you know, act on it? So I think that's become a much more complicated question, and I think, Chuck, you might have some stories to tell about how even big money might influence the message, you know, that gets out there through the trusted news media. So it gets more and more complicated as some of these sort of money interests get involved. But with that, I want to you know, hand it over to Chuck, and Chuck, you can also add to your introduction and give the students a chance to kind of hear where you're coming from, and then I'll let me know when you want me to start the slide deck, and I'll fire that up.
Okay, aloha everybody. Good to see you and good to be with you. Today I'm going to try to paint with a pretty broad brushstroke, and I'm going to talk a little bit about myself at the beginning, but I think it's relevant to you because I can guarantee you that where I started at your age in communications and what the road I took and where the road took me and where I ended up, totally unpredictable. And the key for yourselves is being flexible and resilient, not just with the technologies, but with the technology of yourself and how you function and what you can do to broaden yourself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those things and try to make it relevant to you. But I'm also going to tell a story about the last 50 or so years and how extraordinary the change has been. Okay, so if we go to the first slide, I was supposed to tell you folks my name and title. So you can put it up there. Is it up?
Yeah, okay, here we go. So hold on.
All it says is Chuck Freedman, Communications Strategist, because all I am at this point is I don't see it.
Okay. Let me get back to the first slide.
All right.
Because I'm on the last slide. Okay.
There you go.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So
there you go.
Let me preface that, Chuck, with telling all our students, yeah, the first two questions of the survey have been historically the name of the speaker and where they work. But I'll give you guys a hint. Chuck is retired, so he doesn't work for anybody. So if you happen to use his title for that particular question, that will be fine.
So just so you folks know, I'm 78 years old. I retired in full 4 years ago. I was in college from 1964 to 1968. the high period of time where I was an anti-war leader, and I was very much involved with civic issues, and and um, and I went to a college named Lafayette on the East Coast. And
Hey,
by
Chuck. Let me give the students a quick test. What war is Chuck talking about? And put it in the chat.
okay, so yeah, I'll get to that. So anyway, uh, I became editor of my college newspaper my junior year and the literary magazine because I wanted to shape the agenda. I had a sense of it at 19 years old that the war in Vietnam was wrong, and a hint, and also that on civil rights we had a lot to do. By the time I was a senior, half the students in my college signed a petition to have me removed as editor of the newspaper. They wanted an editor, not a picketer. And I was a pretty known character in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania for my anti-war activities. After college, I joined the Peace Corps of all things. I went to a place called Palau in Micronesia and lived there for 4 years. At the beginning of my stay, the first couple of years, I helped found the first Palauan newspaper that is still in existence today. We ran it on a stencil machine, which nobody here knows what that is anymore, but and I won't try to describe it, but it was a most rudimentary form to get something printed. And so I became bilingual and very much ingrained in Palauan society. After that, I went to the Big Island and was involved in community action, grassroots organizing on all sorts of activities from the Alehu to Hilo, and subsequently ended up back here in Honolulu at the state capitol, where I was John Waihee, who was the first Native Hawaiian governor and still remains really a close friend of mine. He's a terrific guy. I was his communications director for the first 5 years of his administration and oversaw all the communications there. After that, I went to work for a big corporation, Hawaiian Electric Company, where I was vice president of communications. And also, the more I did, the more they gave me to do. I was vice president for human resources and labor negotiations and all sorts of things. But my strength was always communication strategy. I was doing a lot of things that were outside my real reach, but my ability to be able to think and write and strategize sort of kept my head above the water. In my latter years, when I last retired, I was working for Senator Brian Schatz in his Honolulu office. And that's one of the political campaigns that Bert mentioned that I was involved with and left there only 4 years ago. So that's me. But the point of me telling you all this stuff is not karen how great I am. It's that I moved around from a lot of different things, and I never really had my feet planted in what it was I wanted to do. I was just trying to use my brain the right way and keep up with the state of the art. If we can go to the next slide, Bert. I have a question for everybody. I have a question for everybody now. The question is, name that comms machine. There I am, a young man looking so Princeton, like in the governor's office, Governor Waihee's office on the fifth floor of the state capitol. Does anybody have any idea what I'm holding and what that machine down to my right is? That.
Well, wait. Let me check if anybody's trying to put something in the
You can
chat.
chat it in or talking. No.
Okay, wait. I see something. Let's see. Fax machine, printer.
There were no fax machines. I think fax machines had just been invented, but no, this is something called a teletype. And what I'm holding is the paper that would come out of it, long, endless sheets of paper, what we used to call arithmetic paper, math paper, that sort of yellowish hued paper that you guys probably haven't seen, but it was the cheapest paper available. And that was the state of the art. So this is 1987. but that was state of the art. That was state of the art machinery in World War II. Information was typed in over a system that went through the telephone wires, and was able to eventually reach the breadth of the earth. When a hot story came out, the thing would go tick 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 tick. You could hear the little typewriter vehicles typing away, typing letter by letter each word. And when a hot story came out, it would go ding 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 ding. And as late as 1987, this was still being used. It wasn't state of the art anymore. Computers were starting to come in, and so were printers, but just barely. That's how old I am, and how quickly the art has changed. I wasn't that bad looking compared to what I am now. Anyway, let's move along now and talk about more serious things. I want to go back 100 years. I want to go back 100 years, and I don't know if you've heard this name or whether you've studied in any sort of journalism history that you've taken, but Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who wrote primarily in the 1920s opinions that had to do with how we would regulate free speech and how we would regulate the news media. And just throw yourself back 100 years and imagine that world where there's a little bit of teletype through Morse code and the like, and newspapers. Now it was about in the very beginning of radio. And so what Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes had to make decisions over was how we were going to regulate what you could and couldn't say using the news media. And 100 years ago, and I love the first quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes because it underscores the importance of really good writing and really good thinking and really good journalism. And it's still true today, although it's tested. The right to criticize is the guardian of every other right, which is, I don't know, think about what that means to you. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit, but what does that thought mean to you? The right to criticize is the guardian of every other right. Why is that so? Well, obviously, if we don't have our rights to criticize protected, then everything else is for naught. It's all covered. It's all unprotected. And he believed that in order to do that, we had to create what he called a self-governing society. He believed in the minimum of regulation over free speech and over newspapers and journalism and communication, societal communications. That was the ideal then. And he believed in a place of government regulating newspapers, that the marketplace of ideas should be the place that everything is fleshed out. And if somebody says something that's wrong, another person has the right to correct it. And that marketplace of ideas is where we're going to get the closest we can come to a societal truth. And these were brilliant ideas of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes way back 100 years ago. And they're worth remembering today. They're ideals that we should still cling to. He's also the justice who wrote about how we don't have the right to cry fire in a crowded theater. So there are theoretical limits to what it is we can and can't say. But his idea was say as much as you can and always allow criticism from another place to balance out anything that turns out not to be true. I hope that kind of grounds you a little bit in American tradition of communications. We can go to the next one, Bert.
Okay, no, that was really good, and I like the framing of this. Also, the fact that from a geopolitical standpoint, we have our sort of free speech tradition, and then you look at places like China where you say something and criticize the government, and all of a sudden you're in jail. So, that's the other side of that kind of environment that I think exists in the 21st century.
And Bert, don't you think I mean, the danger is taking it for granted, right? I mean, it's a right we have to fight for and protect, uh, and practice as communication specialists.
That's right.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. So now leap ahead to the 1960s, where I'm a long-haired, I won't say commie, but I'm a long-haired hippie fighting against the war in Vietnam and for civil rights in America. And along comes a writer and a thinker whose name was Marshall McLuhan. I don't know if any of you have whether they ever teach anything about him anymore, or whether you've ever heard his name, but he was as revolutionary to the world of communications and strategic communications. He was as revolutionary in the 60s and 70s and later as Justice Holmes was in the 1920s. And essentially, he wrote a book and talked about something which he said described as the medium is the massage, is the message. The medium is the message. Anybody have any idea what that means? Why would the medium be the same thing? Why is the medium the message? Any thoughts? Send me a chat if you do.
Yeah, I'm watching the chat. So
Okay.
anybody wants to chime in, feel free to
Chime in, please do.
or if you want to do it in the chat. But yeah, what is this? The medium is the message.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Why was it revolutionary? Why did it shock the world? Okay, second thought he had was discussion about what he described as the coming of the global village. Now you got to remember, in the 1960s, there are no computers. Really, there are computers. There are these huge A-frame things, but there are no personal computers. There is nothing that resembles the world we live in now. Not barely the thought of it. But along comes Marshall McLuhan, who can see that the world is bending. The whole evolution of mankind is bending toward communications that stretches from New York to New Delhi, from a village
Chuck,
to a city.
Chuck, okay, so I've got some responses.
Okay,
in the
good.
Chat.
Good. Let's look at them.
Okay, so Madeline says the medium you use can change the message. Question mark. Okay, that's. Yeah. I think maybe what you could do too, Chuck, is explain what you think he means by the medium. Anyway, so the medium you use can change the message. Question mark. And then Sang Wu says the medium you use can dictate how people perceive the message. Okay. And then Claire says the way you choose to communicate shows the importance of the message. Okay. And then Rena says the way the message is conveyed can say more about what the message is.
Yeah, you absolutely circled the wagons around it. I think that what was the second one again? It was really good.
The second one was the medium you use can dictate how people perceive the message.
Okay. So what is the medium? I think we know, but back then the medium was limited to newspapers, radio, and books, pretty much.
Right.
And it had been cemented in for quite a few years. There hadn't been. We thought there was great change back in those days, but it was like a glacier compared to the rate of change today. What McLuhan saw coming is and why he went from the medium as the message to the global village is because the medium he saw coming was a computer age, an age where people would be interconnected, and how important that medium was in driving the way the person perceived the message, which our number two chatter nailed. That's it. And he saw it and he wrote about it, and people went, wow, and then some people read about what he wrote with the global village and how we would all somehow be interconnected. He was kind of on the romantic side about it, how this would open up civilizations and societies and interpersonal relationships. He wrote a little bit about some of the risks, but people were agog by just the thought of that. And this is all from his second book was from Understanding Media and the Extension of Man, that we were extending ourselves not just by what we said, but by the vehicle we used to do it. And now you folks are studying computer mediated communications, and at the heart of what you're studying is not just the actual text of the message, but the vehicle that's used to produce it, and vibe it, and think of what that means today. It was an enormous leap for society, and if you ever get a chance, just Google McLuhan and read a little bit about what he was saying. You don't have to read the whole book. Okay, so here we are in the next phase of things. There's this war in Vietnam, which is reported. In those days, there was news in the evening for a half an hour, 5 or 6 days a week. I don't even think it was every night. And it was just, there was no local news. There was just NBC, CBS, and ABC doing highly well produced but narrow news reporting. The leader of the day was a man named Walter Cronkite. That's his face there. And I'll talk about him a little bit more in a minute. The thought in those days was from Arthur Miller, who, I don't know if anybody knows who Arthur Miller is. He was one of America's great American playwrights, but nobody remembers that. He was married to Marilyn Monroe. That everybody remembers that. Arthur Miller described in the 50s and 60s, he said, a good newspaper is a nation. That's not if a nation, is a nation talking to itself. A good newspaper is a nation talking to itself. And there was this belief that that's the central message was through newspapers and a little bit through television news, but television news was not so big. So the medium was pretty limited, but starting to expand. Through this limited medium of newspaper and limited television news, Walter Cronkite became your Uncle Eddie. Everybody, or almost everybody, believed that what you heard Walter Cronkite say on the 6 o'clock news on CBS was the truth. And he ended every newscast with the phrase, and that's the way it is, as if you could sit there and believe it like it was coming from the Messiah. He was very well respected. He was a wonderful man. There is no equivalent today. But in early 1968, he went to Vietnam to see for himself what was really going on, because the sense was that what was being reported, especially by the American government, was not true, and that the war was a losing effort, and one that there was no way to win. Therefore, only ways to lose. And he came back in February of 1968, and he reported to America that we needed to sit down at the bargaining table immediately because there was no way to win the war. And by March of that year, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was the president leading that war and who did many good things as a president, but got us into that quagmire he couldn't get out of, announced that he wouldn't run again. He wouldn't run again for re-election because he knew the American people were so against the war. So it's a little chunk of history that I wanted to tell you about, because that's how everything came to a crux in the road, a fork in the road, and it was guided by this really one guy who was, like I said, everybody's Uncle Eddie. Um, I know that's kind of hard to believe, but it's true.
I believe
Uh,
it because I was there watching them.
yeah, yeah. Oh, you're as old as nearly as old as me. So okay, so the way the world has changed in these slides is what I've tried to describe to you. It's gone from a very kind of single road monolithic society that worked through primarily newspapers and a little bit later on the increasing power of television, and that was it. And the idea was if you could regulate those systems without over-regulating them, if you could put some controls on them, but allow the thinking of Oliver Wendell Holmes to permeate and let the marketplace take care of itself, that there was a chance that that society would be able to glean the truth from what was being reported. So that's, I mean, in a nutshell. All right. So I thought I would jump a little bit to some things that I have learned that I thought might be helpful for you as you move through the world that you will be in. And again, to repeat myself, where you are now and what you're learning and how you will use it and how it will change and what you can do with it and what you can do with yourself, that's all in front of you. As for me, I had an exciting life, but I'll tell you, you couldn't have predicted any of it um, from the day of college to where I ended up. No way. So one of the things I've always told the people I worked for, whether it was Governor John Y. Hay or Senator Brian Schatz or the people at Hawaiian Electric Company, and I've said this for 40 years, 50 years maybe, and I was saying it long before we had problems with our drinking water out at Red Hill. Uh, this predates that by 45 years. And that's the simple question. Why do people always believe the health department when it tells them the water isn't safe to drink, but never believe the health department when it says it is safe? And I would tell this to people and remind them that they had to be very clear with what they said, and they had to understand a very simple fact. Why do you think that's so? Does anybody have any ideas about why it is that people believe the health department when they said the water's pilau, but not when they say it's okay? Any thoughts? What is it about human nature? It's not the health department we're talking about here. It's people. Yeah,
Okay, Madeline says that people are drawn toward negative things.
that's right. That's correct. Any more thought about it, Madeline or anybody else?
Yes, says
People panic.
people panic.
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing which social scientists have studied. The feelings you have, the negative feelings, let's say, that people have, feelings like hate, prejudice, greed, jealousy, they run much deeper in your makeup, in your composition, than do the feelings, the positive feelings of love, empathy, tolerance. Why? Social scientists think probably because when we go back all the way back to survival, from the cave, our evolution from the caves to the savannah plain to Kaka'ako Bobo Center, is that we had to survive. and so that there's a tendency for people to just not simply believe the negative and scare easily, but along with that, to retain it longer. It runs deeper into you. And so you hold on to fears and negative feelings more intensely and over a longer period of time than you do the positive feelings. And I mean, that's something you have to remember, because if you're going to be involved in strategy and communications, beware of the people who tell you, we've got a great story to tell. All we've got to do is tell our great story. And those are the same people who want to avoid trying to get people in advance to understand some of the challenges that are in front of them, some of the negative things that exist, the reality of those things. I won't talk about this last presidential election, but I think really Biden and the Democrats fell into that very problem themselves, and that they just wanted to say positive things for the last 4 years and haven't really been able to be square with people, and that's bothered people. And Trump, on the other hand, deals with the negative all the time. He almost bathes in it. So um, it's a recognition that human nature operates a certain way, and that is to retain these deeper, more negative feelings longer and more intensely. So live by that one, because if you don't, as a strategist, you'll die by it.
That's interesting. So yeah, so Chuck, so the negative, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like it's more visceral. I mean, it's deep down, because if you're in a mode of survival, it's your total sort of being threatened.
That's right. It's the law of the cave.
Ah, good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the law of the cave. I mean, this didn't just happen yesterday. It took a long 100,000 years for us to evolve, but a lot of stuff got ingrained early, and it doesn't go easily. And we all are aware of that, right? We think people should be more tolerant. We think there should be less sexism and racism, and yet we don't understand that fear is a primordial, preeminent feature of the human composition. And it's tough. All you need is love, maybe, but you need a way to, as a communication strategist, you have to be ready for the negative to be surprisingly vibrant. And as the social media is bearing out now, that's like the Bible for a lot of for the casting sort of of negative thinking. Any other thoughts
Oh,
on
that's
that, Bert, or anybody else?
no. I really like how you frame that up, because it certainly makes a lot of sense, and you can see it playing out in a lot of examples. I mean, just look at the media and the stories they tell, right? I mean, if you look at any kind of newscast, I would say 80 to 90% of it is pretty negative, very violent, very um, emotional. None of it is feel good.
The local television reporters who were around, we had a terrific bunch when I was the Governor Hayes comms director in the 80s, mid 80s. There were 35, 40 government and political reporters who all around the Capitol, from the two newspapers, from the radio stations, from both wire services, and from three pretty active television stations. And they were all over the place. And you know what, Bert? They were good reporters. And they were a lot of them were local, some of them weren't. But one thing about it was they were all kind of stuck here in Hawaii, because if you were a good reporter in Hawaii and you wanted to move up, it was hard because there weren't any other markets. You had to go to the mainland to move up. So the good reporters stayed for a long time. And I was around those guys at their peak. Um, and and yet the newspapers and the TV stations, to some extent, weren't making enough money. So along come the consultants, and those same reporters, now they're old people, or a lot of them are dead, would tell me the days got hard, really hard, when the mainland consultants would come to town, sit down with the TV people and tell them, you're running too much, too long, too good, too nice. You need to crack down and just do, if it bleeds, it leads. That's what people want to watch. That's what'll sell advertising. And all of a sudden, the news, even in Hawaii, began to move away from anything in depth and more kind of crime and salacious stuff and negative, more negative stuff. There's nothing wrong with negative if it's factual and true and is getting to a place. But when some guy, some consultant comes in and tells you, you got to do negative, or we can't sell ads. That's kind of the end of your profession.
Right.
That happened. It happened, and the quality of news started to degrade, and that was at about the same time, earlier, really. That was early. That preceded social media. Social media just moved in and filled a vacuum.
I want to see if there's any other student input, feedback, comments.
I hope it's not boring to you guys.
Not boring to me.
Okay. Here, what my next slide was. I had it over here.
Okay, here we go.
Oh, okay. So here's some stuff to take away. First thing isn't on there. You're going to embark on a journey. Where you end up is going to be very different than where you think you're going. But communication strategy to do it well will serve you well as long as you know how to do it, can do it well, and are resilient. So here's some suggestions for you as you move along with your lives in this. First is what I call right brain, left brain. You're a communication strategist, but you're also in a technical field, which is good. Right brain, left brain to me simply means that the right brain is supposedly the creative side, the left brain is more systematic. That it's very, very important for you, even if you think you're just a creative person, to really exercise the systems part of your brain. Get to know how systems work, because systems are part of everything. I was successful at the electric company, not because I was the super creative guy, because hardly anybody at the electric company was creative. They were all systems people, but because I could understand how electrical systems worked. And so I was willing to use for my whole life both sides of my brain as I was learning things. I didn't shy away from the stuff that was somehow boring to me or seemed outside my reach. I would recommend to you guys in your youth, as you're getting out there, to use both sides of your brain as much as you can. Don't just do the thing you like, but do some of the things you don't like so that you expand your brain capacity to do it. The second thing is to experience as much as you can, a full planning cycle once, twice, three times. And what does that mean? That means get involved with an organization. It could be a political campaign. It could be the Humane Society. It could be a government effort to help with the environment. But full planning cycle where you identify a need, you clearly identify a need, you work up a plan to address the need, you exercise the activities to address the need, then you evaluate whether you successfully exercise those activities. And then it's called a cycle, you go back and replan. It's a cycle, it's continuous improvement. It's planning something, doing something, evaluating something, and then doing it better. And you cannot be a strategic person if you don't understand how planning cycles work, and how if you can't anticipate what a planning cycle is. Seriously. Otherwise, you're just going to be Bernie, the press secretary. You're going to be somebody they call in to write a press release or fix something in the computer, but you're never going to be part of the full ball of wax. That's really the exciting part of strategic communications. The third idea I tell young people, try to remind myself, is what I call swimming in the deep. And this is a simple one to explain. It's just that feeling you get when you're out in the water and you go to put your feet down and you can't touch bottom anymore. That's a feeling that you're going to have so many times in your life, maybe not really in the water, but when you're going through either personal experiences or whether you're in business experiences and you're in unfamiliar territory. And if you put your feet down in a business or personal situation and you're unfamiliar with that feeling of, oh my God, I can't touch bottom. If you're not really comfortable with that, then you're going to struggle to solve your problem and to help other people and to be successful. So I'm not suggesting you dive off Kahe Point tomorrow, but get involved with things that are very different from your comfort zone. Be willing to take some risks to get a feeling for what it is while you're young. Because if you just start doing this while you're old, as some people do, they fritz out. It's very hard. It's better to get used to it early. In my case, I got dumped in the water in Palau as a 20-year-old Peace Corps volunteer, and I literally was swimming in the deep with old men who were teaching me how to spearfish and with sharks all around me. So I use that metaphor because I was really there, but you don't have to go out to Kahe Point. You can do it in your regular life. The last thing is generally about communications. And this is what I tell politicians and leaders, but it's also, you don't have at the tippity top to understand this. You just need to be somebody who's involved in the strategy. What do people want? What do customers want? What do voters want? What do fellow employees want when it comes to communications? They want you to paint them a picture about what's going on, and they want you to paint them in it. And if you can work at that all the time, and you got to remember both sides of the axiom, because if you just do one and you don't do the other, it's a horse without a carriage. But if you're able to remember that and tell other people that you're working with, hey, this is what we got. We got to do both things if we want to win people over and get a strong sense of support that's lasting. Then paint me a picture and paint me in it. I don't know what time we've got here, but I'd love to answer any questions.
Yeah, we got about, oh, this is the last slide. Okay.
Yeah, it's the last
Let
slide.
me stop sharing here.
I'd love to hear from you guys. I hope it's helped. I want you to.
Yeah. Let me say that, this is part of our speaker series is really a chance for the students to get a good idea as to people in the field that are actually using the technology, but have learned lessons as a result of the experiences that they've lived through. And so for your students, I mean, you're not going to get a chance to talk to Chuck very often, or guys like Chuck, right? So now's your chance to ask some questions if you're interested in continuing into the communications field. We've had folks come on and talk about PR. We talked about, a whole variety of things. But yeah, Chuck, I thought it was a great lecture here.
You want to hear a great story about communication strategy?
Yeah.
It's 1986. John Y. Hayes decided to run for governor against C. Seftel, a very successful businessman, and Patsy Mink, a wonderful woman and politician. It was a tough Democratic primary, and so I had become his communications specialist for the campaign out of friendship. I've never taken a dollar for any of my political work. I always did it because the people I were helping were good. And this Honolulu advertiser in 1986 was running the first polls of the time. There were no local polls run in newspapers in those days. That was the first one. Guy named Jerry Keir for the Honolulu Advertiser was a big poll guy. They don't like Waihee very much. He's a radical Hawaiian. They take a poll in, so this would have been early summer, I think, of 1986. And John Waihee is behind with it's 6 weeks to go in the election by 36 points.
Wow.
And it's on the front page of the Honolulu Advertiser. And nobody in Honolulu has ever seen a local poll. So they're going, wow. There was no sophistication about polls. So I walk into his office and I say, did you see the morning paper? And he's sitting there at his desk and he's got the paper open. He's just looking at it when I came in. And it's the headlines there. And he looks up from behind the paper and he's got kind of a wrinkly forehead anyways. His forehead was all wrinkled. It looked like you could plant seeds in there, and it would grow plants. He was all like this. And he said, yeah. And guys, I realized I didn't know what to do. I knew my communications, but I was never like a cheerleader or a pep talk guy. I was swimming in the deep. Here's this guy. He's running for governor. He's a loser. 36 points behind. What am I supposed to say? For lack of anything, I called him chief in those days instead of lieutenant governor. I said, Chief. Oh, he goes, Chief. I go, but you got the mana. You always had the mana. I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. I just words came out of my mouth. You got the mana, the force, right? The power in Hawaii. You got the mana. And he gets up from behind the desk and he stands up and he lowers the paper and he looks at me. It's 7:00 in the morning. He looks at me and he says, but Chuck, this time I think I stretched the mana too far. And we sat there and laughed for 15 minutes. And laughter means a lot of things. Laughter just doesn't mean haha, something is funny, in case you haven't figured that out. Laughter can mean a lot of different things. I think at that moment it meant about 10 different things. But we just laughed. And each time that feeling when you're in your ribs, when you're trying to stop laughing, and the harder you try to stop, the more your ribs kind of pulsate out. We sat there and laughed. And then we put the paper down. We went back to trying to do things different and better. Well, I'll tell you one more thing about local people. The Honolulu Advertiser kept running that story for a couple of days. They redid it in different ways, but the same poll, maybe it was on the second page this time. The poll shows that women really hate John Waihee and men don't hate him as much, or whatever it was. I made that up. But what happened at the headquarters is that the first night, if there were 100 people showing up to turn out, the second night they ran the poll, it doubled. There were 200. The third night, there were 400. Exponentially, the more they beat up on John Waihee in the newspaper, the more people turned out. And it was this kind of feeling, what we call the Waianae street fight, which is, you can knock a guy down, but if you knock a guy down and start kicking him, people will get involved. So we ended up winning the primary election, which was only 6 or 7 weeks later by 9 points, which is quite a bit over two good candidates. But that's my good political story for the morning.
So Chuck, in that story, I mean, he was up against a couple of, like you said, really good contenders. Was there anything that Waihee and the campaign did to start to raise his polling numbers? Yeah.
Let me try to do this in a minute. His campaign manager was a guy named Bob Oshiro, the Wizard of Wahiawa. This guy knew grassroots politics like the back of your hand. He was unbelievable at organizing people. I had been brought in at the last minute as the communications guy because the other guy was an alcoholic and couldn't do the work. So I just volunteered and ran things. But I also understood grassroots politics, and I understood Bob O'Shea's way of doing things. So I walked in that day and I said, Bob, we got to we got to turn this a guy we got to turn this campaign into a real grassroots campaign, and we'll use television, but we'll use television to reinforce the grassroots, not grassroots to reinforce the television. We've got to win this in the field and give the people through television the sense that they all know Waihe and can trust him, but the field work will drive it home. And so Oshiro and I were interesting bedfellows. We had a lot of differences, but we were primarily able to shift the way people felt about it. And at the same time, we brought CSEF through various things that I won't go into because it's too long. We wanted to bring CSEF home. He was a representative in Congress. And from the distance, he looked pretty good. From up close, he didn't know Hawaii. He didn't know his stuff. Waihe knew his stuff. So we forced him to come home for debates and stuff. And people got a side-by-side comparison. Between those two things, and I'm oversimplifying a lot, we're able to turn it around. And we could feel it by the end of the primary. We could feel the swing happening. We ourselves really didn't have any polling because we couldn't afford it. We had a little bit, but we couldn't afford polling.
All right.
There's
Okay.
more
No,
more
that's
to it
great.
than Bert. There's more to it than that, Bert. But that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, we can continue that conversation, in another occasion.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So, students, any last? This is the last opportunity to pick Chuck's brain and maybe get a sense of, what it might be like to get into this kind of media world.
I wish you all the best. Both sides of your brain. You got it. Both sides.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And really appreciate your presentation, and I think the students do appreciate it. This is again the last lecture for COM350, and I wish you all the best in your next week and finals, and of course your curriculum that you're taking, your degree that you're striving for. You guys know how to reach me if you need anything, but I'm gonna let you guys all go, and I wish you all the best, and hope that we'll see you again sometime real soon. So mahalo everybody. Chuck, hey, thanks for being my guest lecturer today, and I want to wish everybody a great holiday season. It's coming up on Christmas and New Year's.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Aloha.